Standing on her tiptoes, Julie looked out the barred window of her tower cell. Seeing nothing but Wyoming's distant mountains, she turned away. Dejected, she walked toward the door of her cell, pulling a banana peel out of her hair and tossing it into the hallway. Lisa just sat in her cell, hands under her chin, elbows on her knees, as she stared blankly ahead. Stringbean's tongue was wrapped around the bars of his cell and tied into a knot to keep him from stretching and slipping out through the bars. Praying Mantis wrapped silk all around the bars of his cell. He braced himself, then pulled hard on the strands of silk. After a moment, the strands broke and he careened backward, slamming into the wall. George called to him from his cell. "Any luck?" The last cell in the hall was Chester's. He sat on a hard bench, his palms face up, each one holding an acorn. This meant, of course, that he could not lift his hands or get up. A squirrel appeared at the small barred window of Chester's cell. A small closed pouch hung at its side, draped on a strap over the opposite shoulder. It was the same squirrel that had been outside Valanis's castle, standing on the rock, watching Duncan pull weeds. The squirrel sniffed the air. It saw the acorns. It slipped through the window, scampered down the wall, and walked over to Chester. Finally, it jumped up onto the bench and grabbed one of the acorns and then the other. Chester looked at his hands, now empty, and said, "You're a brave little fella." "You're not even going to try to escape now that I've removed your binds?" asked the squirrel. Chester leapt up in shock. "You can talk." "Hello," the squirrel laughed. "Tell me something I don't know. Now, what's the game plan?" "Who are you? What are you talking about?" The squirrel sounded very annoyed. "We really don't have time for this, but I can see that if I don't explain, we're going to get nowhere fast. Isn't it obvious? I'm a talking squirrel." "Well, yes," stammered Chester. "I can see that, or hear it. Don't you get it? I'm a superfly, just like you." Chester flicked his hand at the squirrel and shook his head. "You're nothing like me." "Oh, yeah," the squirrel said angrily. "What can a squirrel do? How about lift two little old acorns?" he yelled as he tossed the acorns at Chester. "How can you stand here jealous of superheroes and mad at the public because they don't respect you as a superflaw, and then you turn around and don't respect me as a superflaw?" All right, all right. You make a good point. I'm sorry," Chester apologized. "Maybe now you understand why people think you're a little odd." Chester shook his head. "But it's not the same. I don't—" He paused to think. "You're right. It is the same, in a way. So how did you become a talking squirrel?" "Who knows? I was born this way. I'm a highly intelligent talking squirrel, genius IQ, and let me tell you, it stinks." "What? Why?" asked Chester. "Well, for one thing, I don't speak squirrel, and it's not something you can learn. There aren't any books on the subject, and squirrels can't teach it." "So, why would you want to speak squirrel?" "Hello, I am a squirrel, and maybe I want to talk to a nice lady squirrel, but I have no idea what they're saying. It just all sounds like noisy chatter." Chester gave a little laugh. "Sounds like perfect training for marriage from what my parents used to say before my dad got injured." The squirrel glared at him. "I can't get married. As soon as I open my mouth, the girl squirrels run away. I'm tortured, cursed to walk alone in this world, leaping through the branches of trees all by my lonesome. I even try to give them flowers." He opened his pouch, reached in, and pulled out several freshly picked flowers. "See? They just look at me like I'm crazy." He put the flowers back into the pouch and closed it. "The trouble is, I don't think like a squirrel. I think like a man." Chester eyed the little guy and asked, how long does a squirrel live?" "About 3 years," answered the squirrel. Chester said, not very kindly, "Doesn't sound like much of a lifetime to be tortured." The squirrel was hurt by this remark. "It does to me. Don't you ever think of anyone besides yourself?" "Chester, you feel so sorry for yourself, you forget that everyone else has their problems, too. Everyone." Chester put his head down and looked at the floor. "Yeah, I guess you're right." "Now, that's more like it. So," the squirrel jumped up on the window ledge, "let's go save the superheroes." Chester shook his head. "Sorry, can't help." "Can't help? Hey, buddy, I saved you. You owe me." Chester repeated, "No, sorry, can't help." At this, the squirrel leapt through the air and hit Chester square in the chest, causing him to fall over flat on his back. Chester raised his head and looked at the squirrel standing on his chest. "Get off me." "Make me," snapped the squirrel. Chester tried to get up but couldn't. The squirrel sat down on his chest. Chester grabbed at him with one hand and tried to lift. The squirrel didn't move an inch. Chester tried several more times. He even tried using both hands. Nothing. Chester gave up. "Fine, stay there. What do I care?" "Let me know when you are done feeling sorry for yourself," said the squirrel. "I'm not listening." The squirrel stood, walked up to Chester's face, and punched him in the nose. "Hey!" yelled Chester. "What? What are you going to do, tough guy?" The squirrel punched Chester in the nose again. Cut that out, Chester demanded. The squirrel danced around, throwing left and right jabs into Chester's nose. Stop it. The squirrel grabbed onto Chester's nose and squeezed it. Honk, honk, honk. He slapped Chester across the face. Then he turned around and face-washed Chester with his tail. Turning around, he sat down on Chester's chest, facing Chester. Chester spit fur out of his mouth and coughed. All right, I'll listen to what you have to say. About time. The squirrel walked up to Chester's head and whispered in his ear, I know where the superheroes are. You do? Said Chester in amazement. Where? Volanus' castle. The squirrel proudly sat down again on the middle of Chester's chest. Whose castle? Chester wanted to know. Volanus. He's this really evil behind-the-scenes villain. Strange guy. Doesn't have a single plant anywhere on his property. Nothing within miles. Not a flower, a tree, a single blade of grass, nothing. I like to go to his place and scatter acorns on the ground. It freaks the staff out, and they run around picking them up. Lots of fun. Chester looked at him, grinning. We really do need to find you a girl squirrel. Anyway, continued the squirrel, I overheard his entire plot to capture the superheroes and frame you guys. You did? Why didn't you come to us sooner? The squirrel chuckled. Would you have believed me if I had? Chester thought. No, you're right. I wouldn't have believed you. In fact, I wouldn't have believed anyone could kidnap the superheroes. I had to wait until you were captured to get you to listen to me and to see I wasn't just some nut. Chester started to laugh. A squirrel that's a nut. Pardon the pun. Because of Volanus, crime is running rampant all over the world. Only the superheroes can restore order. But he has them frozen in a large room. And if they stay frozen for another few hours, they'll all die. Oh no, said Chester in horror. Oh yes, he built all these clever contraptions to stop them, exploiting their weaknesses. You see, Chester, the truth is, everyone has weaknesses, even superheroes. They're just harder to find in some people. In a way, the superheroes are the real cowards. We superflaws flaunt our flaws. We're not afraid to live with them. We don't try to hide them. Instead, we face them. In that way, we're the real superheroes. Chester smiled. Thanks. I needed that. He indicated for the squirrel to get off him. Oh, sorry. He jumped off Chester, who finally got to stand up. So ask me how well Volanus' castle is guarded. Ask me. Go ahead, ask me, continued the squirrel. How well is... Hardly at all, the squirrel interrupted. He thinks he has nothing to fear, no reason to guard his castle well. He has all the superheroes captured and all the superflaws are in prison. Not only that, but look around. There aren't any guards in this prison right now. There's so much crime, they got called away to help the police. Chester walked over to the bars of his cell. What are we waiting for? He paused and turned around to face the squirrel and asked, What's your name? I don't have a name. Just call me Squirrel, I guess. Chester knelt and shook Squirrel's paw. Nice to meet you, Squirrel. As Julie sat on the bench in her cell, thinking hard about how to escape, Chester appeared and ripped out the bars to her cell. Julie looked at him, surprised. What are you doing? You were right. I was wrong, admitted Chester. I know where the superheroes are. Let's go save them. Chester walked around the prison, freeing the other superflaws in the same manner. They gathered together at String Bean's cell, helping each other untie his tongue from the bars before Chester removed them. Chester turned to his comrades. All right, listen up, everyone. The superheroes are being held hostage by an evil mastermind named Volanus. How do you know that? Well, Lisa, said Chester, Squirrel told me. Who? Squirrel scurried up onto Chester's shoulder. Everyone, meet Squirrel. Hiya, guys. The other superflaws stared at Squirrel with their mouths open. String Bean's tongue fell out of his mouth, and he pulled it back in while the others talked. We're listening to a talking squirrel? Asked Lisa. Yup, said Chester. The superflaws looked from one to the other. Works for me, stated Julie, as the others started to nod their heads in agreement. Squirrel jumped up on a ledge, excited. All right, so the good news is we know where the superheroes are being held, and it is not guarded well because Volanus believes all the superheroes and superflaws are captured. The bad news is, if we don't save the superheroes within the next few hours, they'll be gone forever. Everyone gasped and said, Oh no. George spoke up. But even without any guards, this Volanus will be able to exploit our flaws. How will we be able to beat him? What good am I? I can't see while I'm invisible. I'm useless. Yes, we each have flaws, but so do superheroes, explained Chester while he winked at Squirrel. That's how they got captured. If we all work together, we can make up for each other's flaws. We may be flawed individually, but as a team, we can overcome our flaws. As a team, we are flawless. So, are you with me? He shouted. His comrades all cheered. Let's do it then, Chester said. Now we just need to get out of here. Thinking quickly, Chester punched a hole into the back wall of the cell, hoping they would be able to climb out. Unfortunately, the prison was in the top of a high tower with nothing around for miles. As the Superflaws moved toward the hole, George asked, how do we get down? Praying Mantis flew out the hole and buzzed gently to the ground. The others looked at Lisa. I prefer not to fly. The landings are too hard. She rubbed her butt thoughtfully. Chester turned to String Bean. Come here, please. String Bean walked up to Chester, looking out over the hole. Tongue, please. As String Bean opened his mouth, his tongue fell out of the hole. It unfolded until it reached the ground. String Bean started to fall forward from the weight, but Chester stopped him by placing a hand on his forehead. Everyone climb down the tongue. But our weight will pull String Bean over the edge. Not with me holding his tongue, George. Chester grabbed the top of String Bean's tongue. George climbed down. Julie and the other Superflaws followed. Soon everyone was on the ground except Chester and String Bean. After Chester helped String Bean put his tongue back into his mouth, Chester told him, Your turn, buddy. String Bean stepped forward out of the hole. His legs stretched further and further down until his foot rested on the ground. He stepped out of the hole and his legs shrunk slowly, safely bringing him to the ground. Now the Superflaws looked up at Chester, wondering how he would get down. Chester stepped through the hole onto the wall, took a deep breath, and started to punch the wall fast and furiously, knocking out one huge chunk after another. As he did, the wall became lower and lower, eventually bringing him safely to the ground. Come on, there's no time to waste, he yelled. The Superflaws ran.